What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Football Forecast, episode number 18. This is December 3rd, Tuesday, December 3rd, on a beautiful night here at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. 18 weeks of this, it's probably been a little bit longer, but just some weeks, we've missed out on just a couple, and really we've been hitting the mark every week, but it's been a long time, and we've covered almost the whole college football season. We're almost there, almost to the end. As anyone that watches college football knows, we had the last week of college football here in the regular season. So we're getting into the bowl games now, getting into talking about the bowl projections and where everybody's at. But there's a lot of big news that came out of last week in football. Biggest thing everybody was talking about, we were talking about, everybody in the media and sports media, where was Alabama going to end up? They were at the number 5 spot on the outside looking in at Georgia. And you have to go into Jordan-Hare Stadium and beat Auburn. So that's, that was the plan for Alabama. That was the way they were going to make it back into the playoff. And so they arrive at Jordan-Hare Stadium, only to not play good enough to beat Auburn with a loss, 48-45 Auburn. So that was a big loss for Alabama, one of the biggest in the Saban era, especially in an Iron Bowl where he's lost to Gus Malzahn that many times. And it essentially knocked Alabama out of the playoff. They will no longer have any chance at coming in and being one of the 4 teams in the playoff. So I don't think many of us expected that. I know some people will say they expected that. Those that don't know anything about college football would have expected that. I don't think anybody that really has an idea or analyzes college football on a media level and is serious about it would really put money down on Auburn beating Alabama that night. I know a lot of people said it for media attention. I know there were guys on obviously the ACC network and things like that were talking about Alabama losing to Auburn, right? But really that's just a media thing. I mean, you wouldn't bet on Auburn beating Alabama, but it happened. Auburn beat Alabama in their home in Auburn's house and knocked them out of playoff contention. So what we have here is the first college football playoff without Alabama. So the question is that everybody is asking, who is going to get into the number 4 spot? And as we are having this podcast, the ranking show, the college football playoff ranking show, is on right now. So we will be updating you with those when they get into the about top 10, 15 rankings. But yeah. So Alabama's out. Who's going to be in at number 4? I guess we're about to see here who they're going to put in, but it's not the
top 4
final.
Should be unchanged. I mean, it should still be Ohio State, LSU, Clemson, and Georgia. I think that's going to change. My guess is you'll probably see Utah move up to 5, and maybe Oklahoma move up to 6, perhaps.
Who do you think is going to get in after LSU beats Georgia, apparently? Well, okay, so the rankings are now updated. We have Auburn at 11, Alabama at 12, Oregon at 13, Michigan at 14, and Notre Dame at 15. So Alabama was deranked all the way to 12, and Auburn was ranked all the way to 11.
And of course, they had to make a point to put Alabama behind Auburn, so they weren't going to leave Alabama ahead of Auburn, knowing that Auburn just won that game. So personally, I would have thought maybe Auburn would be a little bit higher. Alabama could be a little bit higher, but you're looking at a 3-loss Auburn team and now a 2-loss Alabama team. So you got some 1-loss teams, and of course, you got 3 undefeated teams ahead of them at this point. So.
And Penn State just got ranked at 10.
Penn State 10. That's because they got basically a better record than Auburn. They don't have a better strength of schedule than Auburn, but they do have a better record. Florida's at 9. A little bit lower than what I thought they would be. while they're up 2 spots from last week. Wisconsin at 8.
Wisconsin went up 4 spots to number 8, so that's a pretty good victory.
That's fine. This coming Saturday, when Ohio State beats them by about 40 points, they'll drop.
Yeah,
they'll drop at least about 10 spots, so that won't last long.
But yes, so in our earlier conversation, we're seeing Alabama out of the playoff, and a lot of people have talks about who's going to be that number 4 when the final rankings drop. As you know, Georgia's going to be a 2-loss team if they presumably lose to LSU. So a lot of people are looking at Oklahoma or Utah. And some people were looking at Baylor, but it doesn't look like they have much traction now at number 7. If they win the Big 12 championship, however, it could be different. It could be a different outcome.
Well, the Big 12 champion is going to have a shot. What it's basically going to come down to, if Ohio State, LSU, and Clemson win their conference championship, they're in the playoff. All they have to do is win. Where the 4 spot's going to come down to is how well does Georgia do against LSU? Is it a close game? Do they look good playing them, but maybe lose a close game? Do they get blown out? Does LSU come out and beat them by 3 or 4 touchdowns? Because if Georgia loses the game, but it's a close game, and they play well, they can still get that 4th spot, and regardless of what happens in the Pac-12 or Big 12 championship games. But if they don't look good and lose, then that opens the door for either Utah or Oklahoma.
Yeah, and judging by the fact that they just ranked Auburn over Alabama, and they ranked them at 11 and Alabama at 12, even if they look good, even if it's a 3-point, even 2-point, a safety loss for Georgia and LSU wins, I still don't see them getting in at all. I mean, look where they put Auburn at 11 over Alabama. That's insane. I mean, they're really going anti-SEC right now, and I don't know. I think they know people are tired of seeing Alabama. People are tired of seeing Georgia. I don't know. I think we really have to look at those 3 teams now: Utah, Oklahoma, and Baylor, like you're saying. The Big 12
well, I think that's probably who it's going to come down to. If Georgia loses and it's not close, they're out. So that opens the door for either Utah, because if Utah, of course, has to win their championship game. They'll be playing Oregon for the Pac-12 championship. If Oregon wins that game, Utah is out, obviously. But let's say LSU wins convincingly over Georgia. It's not a close game. So if Utah wins the Pac-12 championship game, and let's say Oklahoma wins, then it's going to come down to which one of those teams looks better doing it. If Baylor beats Oklahoma for the Big 12 championship, then I think they've got to win convincingly, because
they overall, don't look very good this season.
They don't have a very good resume overall compared to some of the other teams. So
if we look back at the college football playoff ranking show right now, we have Oklahoma at 6. So the committee's put Oklahoma at 6, Utah at 5, and Georgia still at that 4 spot. So they like Utah better. That was no surprise. We know Utah looks better than Oklahoma after all the talk. I haven't even watched a lot of Utah football this year, but apparently Utah looks really good on that defensive front and those linebackers, and they even have a pretty decent secondary. And they look better than Oklahoma for sure in that defensive front. So.
Utah is a solid football team. The problem with them is they're not a great team. They don't. They're not as impressive as the other top-ranked teams. They just kind of go week to week and they win their games. They win solid games. They don't really have any close, games or games that they're just barely beating teams by. They're winning games and playing well. They just don't have any big wins. They don't have any top 10 or top ranked teams that they've beaten on their schedule. So that's hurting them a little bit. But they got a solid team. They're not great on offense, but they're relatively efficient. They got a pretty decent quarterback. They can run the football. Their defense is pretty solid. they're just basically a good team. They don't really do anything to beat themselves.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect ranking for them at 5. And this is what I'm saying. This is what I just said earlier. Committee's tired of seeing these teams where they are. The only reason Georgia's where they are right now is because they have to be. Utah hasn't played the same record that Georgia has, and neither has Oklahoma. But they don't want Georgia in there. That's apparent. And if they lose to LSU, no matter what the score is, I'm thinking they get out. And I'm thinking Utah gets in after that. Well, depending on how they do in their championship, but one of those teams is going to get in, either Utah or Oklahoma if Georgia loses, because that's just showing what the committee is thinking this year, and it makes sense. They've had 5 years of criticism of putting these same teams in every single year, and as much as I can disagree with it because these teams are good. The reason why they select these teams is that they're good. They are tired of seeing that, and they're probably leaning towards putting one of these other teams.
Yeah, and that's the thing about college football, which differs from NFL for whatever reason. A lot of people who are just general college football fans, people in the media, somehow have this mentality that we've got to have all these different teams, at the top of the rankings every year. We have to have different teams playing the playoffs every year. Otherwise, it's boring. I don't hear anybody complain about the Patriots going to the playoffs every year or playing in the Super Bowl every 2 or 3 years, or some of the other teams that always seem to be up there. But for some reason in college football, the mentality is different. Of course, with that, you also have a lot of anti-SEC bias. No, nobody's going to want to see 2 SEC teams in the playoffs. People are wanting different conferences to step up. They want different teams to step up.
I mean, the reality of that is just the conferences are bad. I mean, Ohio State's good, right? They make that conference look decent because they're great. They're the most complete team right now in college football. And at number 2, LSU, they make the SEC look great right now. I mean, that's a high-flying team, and they're not what the SEC is known for. That's probably the best offense in the country because of Joe Burrow, and that defense is nothing special, not really ahead of Alabama's defense, who came back and came within 5 points of beating LSU.
Yeah, I mean, you got basically 5 or 6 teams for the last several years. They always seem to be right up there in the top 4, 5, 6 teams in the country. Clemson has been good for a while now. Ohio State's been good for a while. Georgia is one of those elite teams right now with the way they're playing. LSU has jumped up there this year. It'll be interesting to see if they can remain that level. And Alabama's been there for a good long while now. And Alabama's going to still be good, and they've been dominant in part because, particularly in the SEC, even in some of the other conferences, it's true that a lot of these conferences are top heavy. You seem to have 1 or 2 really good or dominant type teams, and you have a lot of teams behind them are kind of just middle of the pack or teams that just aren't very good. Ohio State has been kind of ruling the Big Ten for a while now. Alabama, same thing in the SEC. Georgia's been good here for the last few years, and before that, Florida was good for a while. They've kind of fallen off. LSU's kind of up and down, but they're good right now. Oklahoma has been doing really well here. For quite some time now in the Big 12. They've kind of ruled that conference more or less. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe this year and maybe in the coming next few years, if some different teams are going to step their game up and maybe start getting to the playoffs and maybe challenging for a championship.
I think that's what's happening. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why Alabama's not in there this year, which is going to bring me to my next point. But I see a lot on Twitter, especially I do a lot of reporting on Twitter, so I see especially now people are saying that Alabama's not in the playoff because it's the end of a dynasty, and That's obviously not true, and we all know that. I mean, you can't count Alabama out. You can't count Nick Saban out. You can't count against them or bet against them. But college football is getting a lot different, and you really don't have to bring any stats to back that up, um, because I could throw two names at you right now, and I mean things look different. I mean college football looks different. LSU and Clemson, Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence. These guys are making college football look like a totally different movie, a totally different ball game. So when you take these new quarterbacks, these new offenses, these new systems, and you challenge a team like Alabama, you challenge these teams in the SEC, and you challenge traditional teams, you're going to get some people that slip in after a while and start to figure things out, and you're going to have to basically get some success when you challenge traditions like that. And teams like LSU, teams like Clemson have gotten that against Alabama and the other people that they face, the other high-ranking teams, the other high-ranking coaches that they face. They out-coach them. They outplay them. They have better strategy. They have a better offense. They find mismatches and things like that. So that contributes to the reason why Bama's not there. But another reason is that Bama has more freshmen starting on their roster than they've ever had in the history of the program. And they're all on defense. They're all on defense, or at least the majority. And the two that you see on offense, you rarely ever see. And when you do see, it's when the score is up, about 45 points past what it should be. And that same stroke, you have people complaining about Tua being in, but at the same time you have freshmen playing. But this is different. Every team has freshmen playing a little bit. Alabama has about 6 of them. Their entire defense is full of true freshmen. So that's a big reason why they didn't make it in. Obviously, there's no excuses. That team should have beat Auburn by far. That should have been a 2-score game. Mac Jones, and I guess we'll just try to transition into that Auburn game because that's probably game of the year. That's probably what ESPN will rank as game of the year this year. But Mac Jones did absolutely phenomenal. A lot of people criticized him for what he did in that game, for how he might have cost Alabama that game. But in the scheme of things, I mean, everybody wants to throw shade at Mac Jones because he threw those 2 interceptions. I believe both of them were pick sixes. He had to get down the field to make those picks, and the one in the red zone, very far deep into the red zone on the goal line, he had a great drive on all of those times he got into the red zone, and he should be applauded for that. Somebody that hasn't had that many starts and is in a game against Auburn in their stadium playing as well as he did. I mean, he was 26 out of 39 for 335 yards and 4 touchdowns. That's pretty solid, and that's better than Bo Nix. He's better than Bo Nix, and we said that before. Bo Nix completed just half of his passes, 15 out of 30, 173 yards and 1 touchdown. On the ground, Alabama dominated Auburn more than I've seen in a while. Najee Harris ran for 27 carries, 146 yards, and a touchdown, while Boobie Whitlow only ran for 16 carries and 114 yards. So they dominated on the offensive front, Alabama, and they played better defense than Auburn did. But Auburn capitalized on not having to play any offense and barely having to play any defense because it was handed to them in the middle of the field. Every time they started a drive, they were on the 50-yard line because every time they got some random pick or a pick six that could beat them out. And if you take away those 2 pick sixes, that game is at least within a 2-score lead for Bama. So Mac Jones, give him some praise. You really have to put it on the 2 just bad throws and the fact that the defense just couldn't stop those short little gains and the short amount of plays that they had to get to even score when they started at the 50-yard line at midfield. When Alabama gave them a lot of opportunity to score, the defense should have stopped that, but it is a young defense, so that contributes.
I mean, Alabama had a lot of players that played well, had good games. It just came down to just, even with all the plays they were making and the points they were put on the board, there were just too many mistakes. I mean, consider this. Auburn's a good team, and of course they're tough to beat when they're at home. Everybody knew that. But consider this. Alabama scored 45 points. but they had 13 turnovers, the most they've ever had under Saban. I mean, not turnover. I mean, 13 penalties, the most they ever had under Saban. Quarterback threw 2 pick sixes. Auburn got every break, every controversial call went their way except for one, and they still only won the game by 3 points. So,
yeah.
I mean, even our kicker had to hit the upright trying to kick a kind field goal with less than 2 minutes to go to seal it for them.
It's just 100% undebatable that Alabama played a better football game than Auburn did. In the grand scheme of things, Auburn was just able to capitalize on all the mistakes that comes with it. Because you can play a great football game and make many mistakes. I mean, you can still play good football and make a lot of mistakes. We see teams do it all the time. Oklahoma being one. They make a lot of mistakes. Teams in the NFL do it a lot. Brett Favre, one of the best quarterbacks ever, is an interception king. Not because he catches them, because he threw them. I mean, mistakes happen. They were able to capitalize on a good bit of them, barely. They were barely able to scrape by. He was 15 out of 30. But yeah, that contributes to the loss, and that is why Alabama lost, and that's why we won't see them in if we would have saw them in anyways. But another big thing another big factor that I see a lot of, and I would like to just add on as well, that defense. I mean, you look at middle linebackers over the years. C.J. Mosley, Dante Hightower, Dylan Moses was supposed to be the guy for Alabama. He was supposed to be the old C.J. Mosley, the Dante Hightower, the guy that was going to come in there and get people set behind the line and get people ready for the play and be the quarterback of the defense.
We didn't have a defensive quarterback.
Injured.
Not anybody who had any experience doing it.
So Shane Lee was put in as our middle linebacker, a true freshman, Shane Lee. Big guy. He's almost like a defensive tackle. Earlier in the season, I called him a defensive tackle on wheels. I made a big deal about him. He has size, stature, and frame, but he just creates this love-hate relationship with Alabama fans because he pairs it with his lower-than-average linebacker speed and also the fact that he's inexperienced with calling a defense. Now, we just see a couple times where he was calling a defense, but for the most part, he had no control. A lot of people, are blaming Pete Golding right now for a lot of blown plays, especially in the flats, a lot of blown pass rushes and things like that. And while I'm not taking any blame away from him because that's his job to coordinate a defense however you can, Shane Lee did not quarterback a defense. That was not his job this year. They did not want him to go in and act like a Dylan Moses, act like a C.J. Mosley. They just wanted him to play his position, play his middle linebacker. They knew he was inexperienced. They didn't want him quarterbacking his defense, changing these plays up, putting these guys where they have to be set. You saw him a couple times set some plays. You saw him tapping on some players' backs, pointing around, pointing to the flats, telling people where to go, getting people set. But for the most part, you just saw guys run out on the field and get set and ready to go. These guys are inexperienced. And that's another factor as to why Bama hasn't been beating people this year like they used to or usually have. And then, the performance against Auburn, the performance against LSU even. Everybody was able to take advantage of that, and you can't have the adjustments that you usually have on a defense if you don't have a middle linebacker or quarterback to, make those adjustments, to call those on the field as they go.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have a guy on defense that's responsible for getting the team in the right sets, getting them lined up right, make sure everybody's in the right position. And we just didn't have an experienced guy to do that. And every other year you can think of, Alabama's always had a guy who's been able to do that. One reason why our defenses have always been so good. You pair that with the fact that we had 4 true freshmen that started all or most every game this year. I'm talking about 2 linemen in the middle and then 2 defensive linemen that were full-time starters. Alabama, there's just a few areas where they were usually strong and good and was kind of the backbone of Alabama's success. They didn't have that this year, and you're occasionally going to have a year where things happen, either injuries or maybe just bad luck or whatever you want to call it. But even with people talking about the problems Alabama had, they still finished 10-2. They still got a chance to finish at 11-2 this year, depending on what happens in the bowl game, and they'll be back next year. Now, will they be a dominant team like they have been in past years? Maybe not.
Yep.
But they still got a chance to be really good. They're going to have another good recruiting class coming in.
Number 3 in the country right now.
You know, who knows what they're going to do as far as their coaching defensively. If Saban's going to maybe look at going after a different coordinator. If he perceives that to be an issue, or what's going to happen there. But in any case, Alabama should be better defensively next year. All these guys, these freshmen are going to have more experience. With some players will be getting back, and some of the incoming players that they expect to contribute, they should have greater depth. Of course, quarterback position is going to be a big key. Who's going to be the quarterback? But other than that, Alabama is in pretty good shape in all the other positions on their offense. Even Najee Harris leaves, he may come back. Nobody knows that yet. If he comes back, and then you got Trey Sanders coming back from injury, who's a 5-star running back. You got Brian Robinson. You got Kalen Robinson. They've got plenty of good enough running backs to have a good, strong running game.
The quarterback position, I mean, you got Mac Jones coming back.
Mac Jones can do a good job. You got the kid coming from California, Bryce Young.
Yep. Supposed to be the number 1 recruit in the country. I think as of today, he finalized rating was the number 1 player in the country. So
we'll have to see how that quarterback competition will go this coming spring.
I hope he eats a little bit, though, because he's 5'11", like 180 pounds. So.
Well, and then your receivers, Jerry Jeudy's probably is going to go to the draft. He's expected to be a top 5 pick. Henry Ruggs probably also. A lot of people have him pegged to go somewhere in the top 10. So they're probably going to leave early. But you got Jalen Waddle coming back. Everybody knows what a great game he had in the Iron Bowl. We'll probably get Devonta Smith back. Now, he could declare for the draft, but he is not as highly rated as the other few guys. He may decide to come back and maybe try to have a great senior year and up his draft stock maybe. So there's probably at least a 50-50 chance we get him back. But you got some other guys who are kind of waiting in the wings that are good enough to be able to step up. So we should still be pretty good as far as our receivers go. We should have a good offensive line next year. So Alabama's going to be good. The schedule will be a little bit tougher next season. But more than likely, Alabama will probably start somewhere in the top 10 start next season. And they'll have, it's probably as good a chance as anybody else of at least winning the SEC next year.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that just because of the offense. I mean, just because of the guys coming back, because of the guys that are coming in. Not to mention Trey Sanders, who when we opened up our first podcast, I was so high on Trey Sanders. That's a guy I just absolutely love coming in, my favorite recruit in Alabama's class. I mean, he was a beast at IMG. He was a man playing with boys. So that's a guy that's going to come into Alabama next year, and he's gonna do great things if he's 100% healthy. And I'm really looking at the Alabama team next year. It could be as dominant again. I mean, you got these guys coming back as sophomores, this entire defense. Hopefully you can get some guys back from this year that were out. I believe that's LeBron Ray, I believe Dylan Moses, and someone else. There's another one I'm forgetting. But if you can get those guys back, at least one of them, one or two of them, then that defense can be as good as you need it to be, especially with the recruits coming in, the depth that they're going to have on that front. But yeah, offensively, Alabama's not really changing except for Tua, one of the best players that ever played college football, who is weighing if he should go into the draft right now or if he should, come back. So he's leaning on his parents for that. ESPN reported right before we started the podcast today, actually. So yeah, he did a little bit of an interview there, but yeah, we talked about Tua, a couple weeks ago when that happened.
And also too, if you look at the rest of the SEC, if you look forward to next year a little bit, all these other teams, they're at the top of the league this year. You got several of them are going to be in a little bit of a rebuilding mode next year. Joe Burrow is going to be leaving LSU.
Never know where Joe Brady could be either.
Joe Brady, there's going to be a lot of people who's going to be after him. I know Texas is one team, and there's going to be others. I think Orgeron will do whatever he can to try to keep him there. Obviously, with the success they had this year, but there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be going after him. So it'll be interesting to see if he remains at LSU next year or not. But LSU's going to have to find a new quarterback regardless. They got several other players that are probably going to be leaving early. So they're going to have some players to replace that were key for them this year. You look at Auburn. Auburn is losing a lot from this year's team. So they've got they're going to be in a bit of rebuilding mode next year. Georgia should be awfully good. I think probably Alabama and Georgia are probably going to be the two top teams, at least as far as what people are expecting, as far as who's going to contend for the conference championship next year. That's probably going to be most everybody's top two picks. I think Florida will be really good. I don't think they're quite at that level yet, but they've won 10 games this year, got a chance to win 11, and they should be good again next year. But the competition at the top, at least for Alabama, may not be quite as much as it was this year.
Not as tough. And I think if you look at Alabama's schedule, I believe they play Georgia week 4. You just went over how Georgia could be the best SEC or one of the best SEC teams in the top two, Alabama and Georgia, when LSU kind of falls off, if they do, with the loss of Joe Burrow and possibly Joe Brady at offensive coordinator. Those 4 weeks will give a little bit of time to see is LSU the same team. That'll give a little bit of time to set the early SEC rankings, to set who's going to end up in the playoff, which SEC team, or how many. So Alabama plays Georgia. That's a little bit of a playoff game, honestly, because we know if the other conferences are looking good, only one SEC team is going to get into the playoff, per usual. That could be a little bit of a playoff game early in the season, week 4. I believe that's when they play Georgia. So yeah, that's gonna set the football season early, to set up the whole ranking system early. That's gonna be great. But yeah, can't look too far though, because bowl season is almost here, and teams are looking to get their spot. A lot of people were projecting Alabama to play Memphis or Virginia in one of the bowl games, but now Alabama is ranked number 12 in the college football playoff ranking, so really up in the air about who's going to play who. I think a lot of people are set on Florida playing Florida playing Auburn and somebody at Oregon, right?
No, I think Florida right now, I think a lot of people are expecting them to maybe go to the Orange Bowl and play Virginia.
Okay, I thought they wanted them to play Oregon. I thought that was their number 1.
And Alabama, I think most people are projecting them either to go to the Cotton Bowl and play Memphis, or possibly go to the Citrus and maybe play Virginia Tech. But you're going to have to wait till after all the games are done next weekend, because you're going to have some teams that are going to lose, that are going to be dropping down. So Alabama might be in position to maybe move up a spot or two, and that could determine how some of these bowl matchups shake out. I think a lot of people are expecting Georgia to go back to the Sugar Bowl, because they'll be the highest ranked SEC team that's not in the playoffs. So that team usually goes to the Sugar Bowl, but we'll have to see. I think at this point, I think it's pretty well easy to figure out kind of who's going to what bowl. There's, most teams, I think you can probably narrow it down to a couple, maybe 3 bowl games at the most. But we'll have to see how it goes. But Alabama, right now it looks like it's probably going to be one of those 2 bowl games, but we'll see.
It should be a fun bowl season nonetheless. I mean, you got a lot of good teams this year. A lot of teams that people wanted to see in the playoffs that probably won't get into the playoffs play. And, regardless of what happens, regardless of where anybody goes, it's gonna be a fun bowl season, for sure. This week, I know we it was pretty much rival week. We saw a good bit of rivalry games here, and honestly, there was some not really like surprises, but there were some things that were worth noting. Um, One thing is Ohio State's complete whooping of Michigan. 56-27. Michigan's kind of a joke. Now probably one of the most overrated programs in college football history at this point. Um, Ohio State's no joke. With that win, Ohio State is absolutely no joke, and they could easily. I could see them winning it all, because I mean Justin Fields was 14 out of 25, 302 yards and 4 touchdowns. He got hurt. I forgot exactly what his injury was. Something on his knee because he came out with a knee brace.
Yeah, he tweaked his knee or did something to it, but he still came back and played in that game. So.
He came back, and after the first play, when he came back, he threw a passing touchdown. So he threw a touchdown first play. And J.K. Dobbins just put his name in the Heisman race. I mean, he's not going to get it, obviously, because you got guys like Joe Burrow, but he just put his name in there with that performance. 31 carries for 211 yards. He walked all over Michigan. It's a wonder that Justin Fields got that many yards if J.K. Dobbins got that many yards. That's crazy. He had 4 touchdowns himself. That's insane. J.K. Dobbins is a great running back. I mean, he's up there with the best of the best this year. He completely ran through Michigan, and Ohio State with that's a complete team. I'm surprised they gave up 27 points. I don't think it's anything to worry about. I still think it's a complete team, the most complete team, and I could definitely see them winning it all. I definitely see them beating Clemson. I definitely see them putting up more points than LSU could handle with that defense. So that's a good performance by Ohio State. Clemson beat South Carolina 38-3 this week, so no surprises there. It would be kind of surprising if you saw Will Muschamp keep his job after that kind of whooping. I know it's Clemson, but
well, a lot of people think that Will Muschamp should lose his job. However, the school president and the athletic director have both been strongly supporting him and insist that they're not going to be making any changes. So
and he did fire 2 coaches already. So usually when you see a coach fire coaches under him, he's probably not getting cut.
That's probably true.
So yeah, you're correct about that.
Yes, with Muschamp at South Carolina, it's probably just a matter of time. Maybe he'll get one more year, but eventually it's probably he's probably going to lose that job. I mean, he's just a guy who is an okay head coach. He's not a great head coach. He's never going to be. He's just one of those guys who's just a better coordinator than he is a head coach. If you look at his head coaching career, other than 1 year he had at Florida where everything just kind of went his way, and I think Florida went 11-2 that year. He's been more or less about a 500 coach. The rest of the season he had with Florida and with South Carolina. Clemson beat South Carolina 30-3 in that game. South Carolina lucky it wasn't a lot worse. Clemson jumped on them early and I think kind of took it easy on them after that. But South Carolina I think had well less than 200 total yards. They didn't have very many first downs. They were never in that football game.
And they never were ever going to be. They could have so many things go their way. I mean, they could have as many things as Auburn had go their way, and they probably wouldn't have stayed in that game. South Carolina is just a joke of a team this year. It's a shame because their quarterback isn't very terrible after Jake Bentley's sudden being down, being out for the season, and Ryan Helinski coming in. He's not bad. He's not a bad QB, so it's kind of a shame that he's going to be there in that kind of program. And I mean, I know Jake Bentley's transferring, leaving. So,
and the question all of America is asking themselves this week: how in the world did Georgia lose to South Carolina?
I know. Yeah, that's the reason why I just don't have them in my top 4. I cannot put them in the playoffs. I just can't.
I think at this point, a lot of people are willing to overlook that loss because of all the wins that they've had against against some of the teams they've beaten. But still, I mean, anybody who's analyzing it and trying to see how all this is going to shake out, there's a lot of people who still hold Clemson, hold against them that they had a close win earlier this year against North Carolina.
UNC, yep.
Had another game, or a couple other games earlier this year where they didn't look particularly great, that people still kind of point to, but nobody's going to look great every single week. Every team seems to have a game or two where they don't play exceptionally well, or maybe they play lesser teams closer than what people think they should. Happens to pretty much everybody. But, Georgia's still a pretty good team. They probably deserve to be where they are at number 4. But unless they win against LSU in the SEC championship, they're not very likely to make it in the playoff.
Yeah, if they beat LSU in the SEC championship, they're in the playoff for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, they deserve to be in the playoff if they do that. I'll be very, very happy if Georgia can somehow beat LSU, because that would be a great story, just to see everybody trying to count Georgia out and then them coming and beating LSU. I don't see it happening at all. I see, for me, LSU's prophecy this year, the way I see it, is that they're going to go probably all the way, play Ohio State and get beat by Ohio State, probably by a touchdown, maybe 2, maybe touchdown and field goal. I don't see them being better than Ohio State. I do see them being better than Clemson and Georgia. So hopefully Georgia can shake that all up. I know a lot of fans don't care what happens at this point, since there's probably going to be 2 SEC teams in there, but hopefully Georgia can shake all that up. If they beat them convincingly enough, it'd be crazy to see where LSU might fall. But I doubt they would fall out of the top 4.
If LSU loses to Georgia in the SEC championship and it's a relatively close game, LSU's still going to be in the playoff.
Yeah, definitely.
If LSU beats Georgia in a close game, Georgia may be in the playoff, but it's no guarantee, because it's going to depend. So. It's going to depend on who wins the Big 12 and Pac-12 championships and how good those teams look. But Georgia would still have an opportunity there. But it would have to be close if they lose. They can't lose by 2 or 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, Oklahoma's got to play Baylor, and that's a team that just beat Kansas, and I know it's Kansas, but they beat them 61-6. So they have firepower. They have offensive firepower, over there at Baylor. Their quarterback got 13. He was 13 out of 25 for 182 yards, so pretty average, but on the ground they were able to carry 14 for 92 yards. Overall, Kansas had a good offensive performance too, but Baylor's defense is no joke. We saw it against Oklahoma. We saw it for a little bit. I mean, they had that game won.
Baylor's a good team. They had Oklahoma down. They let them come back and win the game. Baylor's problem is they just don't have any quality wins on their resume. They just haven't beaten anybody that's very good. So that's what's really hurting them right now. And likely, for them to get into the playoff, they would not only have to beat Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship, they would have to do it convincingly. And that means that they would probably need Oregon to beat Utah, because that would ensure you have a 2-loss Pac-12 champion, which would put the Pac-12 out of the playoff. And then they would probably need LSU to win convincingly over Georgia. So Baylor, even if they beat Oklahoma, they've got to look good doing it, and even then they still need some help.
Yeah, because all that would essentially do if they beat Oklahoma is knock Oklahoma out of the race and hope for Utah to try to win that Pac-12 championship convincingly, try to get Georgia out of there. Everything's kind of pointing for Georgia to get in if they lose by a little bit, but you really will have to see. Another thing to take note of this week is LSU and Texas A&M's game. LSU beat Texas A&M 50-7 as expected. They were going to steamroll them. Texas A&M is a terrible team this year. I mean, that's the only way I can describe them, as just an awful, disappointing team. And I'm surprised I haven't heard in the media at all in the past week. I've heard people talk about Nick Saban. I've heard people question Nick Saban in the past week. But I haven't heard a single person talk about Jimbo Fisher. I haven't heard one person say, oh, maybe Jimbo Fisher is not the right guy right now. I haven't heard a single person. And that's the one thing I want to bring up. I literally never heard anybody talk
It's just his second year at Texas A&M. People are, I think, still willing to give him a chance to build up his talent and recruit and to build his team and program there. But if you look at Texas A&M's schedule, every good or decent team they played this year, they lost to, and it wasn't, and none of them were close. They lost all those games by double digits. Some of them they looked bad losing, such as against LSU. They also didn't lose. They didn't look very good against Alabama. Clemson, even though Clemson played poorly against A&M played much worse, and they were never in that game. So they never seriously threatened to beat any of the good teams on their schedule. Yeah, I mean, they do fine when they're playing mediocre or bad teams. They'll go out there and look fine and win games. But when they played somebody good, they didn't look good against those teams. So
that's true. I mean, that's true. Yeah, a lot of games this week that are pretty much just blowouts. You kind of have your team set. Everything's kind of set for what we're gonna see in the playoffs. So yeah, everything except the number 4 spot. So, yep, that's gonna be interesting to see who grabs that number 4 spot. It's definitely gonna be a big weekend in college football for sure. Yeah, I mean, things are looking up for a couple different teams. You know, Baylor and Utah, they could secure a spot if they really wanted it. All they got to do is play great, play a really great game against their opponent. I don't think Baylor's going to be able to do that against Oklahoma. I just don't see them getting in at all with the way they have to play Oklahoma. But Utah could definitely do it, and if they play a little bit better than Oklahoma beats Baylor, if assuming that's what happens, you can see Utah in there. So
I think more than likely it probably will be Utah, because they just have to win. If they play a good game and beat Oregon, even if they beat them by, a touchdown or whatever, if they play a good game and win, I think they're going to be in the playoff. I think people are wanting to see at least a different team or two in the playoff, and I think if Utah wins, I think that will. I think they'll get the benefit of a doubt. Even if Baylor beats Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship, it's probably going to be a close game, and they're probably not going to. I don't expect them to win impressively enough to jump Utah. And if Utah wins, even if Georgia looks good and loses a close game to LSU, in the committee size, championships still carry a lot of weight, and I think Utah would probably get that 4 spot over Georgia, as long as they win.
I mean, just for fun, if we go all the way back to the first college game day this season, we look at Lee Corso's way too early playoff picks for the year. He had Alabama at 1, Clemson at 2, Utah at 3, and Ohio State at 4. And he had Utah beating Clemson, playing Alabama in the national championship, and then beating Alabama to win it all. So, I mean, if you think about it, it's not too far off. I mean, Clemson's at number 3 now. Ohio State's at number 1, so they're flopped. So, Utah's at 4 if they get in. So, Utah would have to basically they have to play Ohio State. But here, Utah is playing Clemson in Lee Corso's playoff pick, right? And Clemson, at the beginning of the season, is equivalent to what we think Ohio State is right now. I mean, they're really good. They're unbeatable. I mean, they just look really, really good. One of the best teams we've seen in a while. So, if Utah can beat a team like Clemson, they could probably beat a team like Ohio State. And Alabama wins against Ohio State. So, that would pretty much be LSU versus Clemson. So, I don't know. Utah has a pretty good shot at getting in, but it's a wonder of what they would actually do. Because I'm just trying to think of hypotheticals, because everybody's saying we don't want Utah in because that would just be an absolute blowout. If we're going to put somebody in, put Georgia in, and then maybe we could see a little bit of a game. But a lot of people are saying Ohio State would blow Utah out. So I'm just trying to think of all the hypothetical situations where I could see Utah maybe.
But yeah, and also
competing.
too, that's something that the committee is going to be considering as well. I mean, it's not necessarily picking who they think are the four best teams, or who they think are maybe the four most deserving teams. They want to put teams in there that are going to provide the best matchups also. Um, so I mean, if it comes down to that four spot, and they think, if two teams are kind of even in the committee's eyes, say it comes down maybe to a Utah and a Georgia, I think anybody that has been watching college football would probably agree that Georgia would be a much tougher opponent for Ohio State than Utah would be. You don't know that, but based on the strength of conference, the strength of Georgia's schedule, and the talent level they have, that would be reasonable to think that. One of the things that they always throw out when it comes down to this last playoff spot or two is they want to pick teams or put teams in there that are unequivocally better than the teams they're being compared to.
Yeah.
But in this case, if you don't have a team that necessarily stands out, and you got these teams, you have all these factors that they're going to throw in that you have to consider. You look at conference championship, you look at head-to-head competition. The eye test is always matters. So it's going to be all those things. So
I mean, another thing is Georgia's 11-1, right? And
right.
Boise State is also 11-1. So it's like you can't put the most deserving team thing. The reason why they stopped saying that is just because of how stupid it actually is. The most deserving team is Boise State. I mean, they're 11-1. I mean, there's a lot of teams that are 11-1 right now that could be more deserving than Georgia. But obviously, like you said, they want somebody to play somebody that's going to give them a competition, that's going to give a good game. And I mean, that's really their job. You have the bowl committee, that's their job, to make a entertaining game, and then the playoff committee is to make an entertaining playoff. At the end of the day, it's money.
Well, part of that's true, but also too, if you compare, let's say you compare Boise State and Georgia. Georgia, of course, 11-1. Both teams are 11-1, but if you take Boise State and say they had to play Georgia's schedule,
exactly,
everybody knows it wouldn't be 11-1.
They wouldn't be 11-1. They'd probably be.
But if Georgia played Boise's schedule, they'd probably be undefeated. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, it can't be the most deserving teams now. We all know that. That's why there's so many different factors that go into the playoff now. And the fact seeing the fact that everybody's saying Georgia's going to get in makes me I agree and disagree with that at the same time. I like it because I think they're the only team that could compete with Ohio State, because I think we all know they're going to be the number one. I think that's a lock. That's a virtual lock at number one. I mean, they're going to be the best team. I want a team that can compete with Ohio State, because I want a team that's going to have the best chance to take them down. That's what everybody wants, right? If you're not an Ohio State fan and they're the number one team, I mean, everybody naturally wants somebody that's going to take the number one down. We want the best team to do that. And I guess Georgia is that team. As much as I don't like them and as much as I think they're bad, there's nobody better at this point that I can equivocally say. I think Oklahoma, maybe. But if Utah plays a better game and Oklahoma lets up a lot of points, then Georgia has an historic defense right now. So it's weird to say that Georgia may be the best team out of all those.
Georgia is really good on defense. Georgia's deficiency right now has been their passing game. Jake Fromm has had 4 consecutive games where he's completed less than 50% of his passes. He has made plays. He's played well enough for Georgia's offense to be successful and for them to win the games. But it's largely been Georgia's running game and their defense that has carried them this year.
We knew the Georgia wide receivers going into the season would be a problem too.
And it was.
Big prediction.
It's been an issue. They've done okay against lesser teams, but when they play a team that's really good or a team that had a good defense, in a lot of cases, they just didn't show up.
Yeah, that's a classic problem. We really haven't seen that in a while with a lot of college football teams, but saw it here. And I mean, we talked about it a lot, but I think towards the very beginning of the season, instead of the off season, at the beginning, week 1, when we saw Georgia play, I think we kind of both agreed it probably wouldn't have been a problem later on. Like, okay, Jake Fromm can still do it, but now, like, our prediction was 100% right. That was a huge problem for Georgia, and hopefully it's something they can fix if they play Ohio State. They don't necessarily have to make it great. They just need a couple big plays, and that defense can take care of a lot of it. I mean, Justin Fields is really good, but Chase Young is amazing. They have to keep the ball away from Chase Young, so you have to take it out of the air, and you have to run it to the opposite side. DeAndre Swift can do that. I mean, he's a great running back. And Jake Fromm is a good quarterback. I mean, he showed up against Alabama twice in two different situations. Obviously, couldn't beat them and played some bad football in the SEC championship, but he showed up.
Georgia is playing their style of football is basically the same as what Alabama had earlier in this decade, when you had guys like A.J. McCarron playing quarterback, and McElroy. The formula is basically the same. Is having a good, strong defense, good, strong running game, winning at the line of scrimmage, and making less mistakes than your opponent. That's largely what Georgia does. And if they can play well in those areas, they got a chance to beat anybody they play.
Yeah.
Because if you can run the ball and play great defense, you're always going to have a chance.
That's the way they're going to have to do it. Like I said, they got to keep the ball away from Chase Young if they play them.
Well, keep it away from Justin Fields in that offense.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're passing through the air with these inexperienced receivers, you got to wait a little bit for them to get open. You got to wait on these routes longer than you would have to with a Jerry Jeudy, right? So you're standing back there in the pocket for a little bit longer, which is why we've seen Jake Fromm get sacked a lot. And it's because he has to wait on these. He has to wait on these breaks, have to wait on these cuts, have to wait on these hands, to go up and catch these balls. And these reads take a little bit longer for him because of these receivers. So it's best if you just keep that kind of advantage away from Chase Young, keep it on the ground. And, like you said, they have to go back to 100%. Can't just play conservatively sometimes, play a little bit wild, here and there.
You have to take chances, but they have to be smart about when they take them. But also, too, if Georgia and Ohio State were to play one another, Chase Young would largely be a non-factor in that kind of game because of the way Georgia plays. Chase Young is the reason why all these teams are going to be after him when the draft comes is because of his abilities to pass rush.
Yeah.
And when you're playing a team that probably is going to be about 70% run, Chase Young is not going to have many opportunities to rush from at quarterback.
Exactly, which is why they just have to put those play actions in the right spot.
In fact, I believe in this last game against Michigan, I don't think he had any tackles in that game. So, him it's not about being great against the run. I think he does fine in that area, but his bread and butter is as a pass rusher, and he is not going to be he would not be a determining factor playing a team like Georgia because he's simply just not going to have very many opportunities.
That's truth, and he could very well be a first-round pick as well. Speaking of,
he could be
a number one pick is what I mean.
He could be the number one pick,
yeah. He could very well be number one pick. Speaking about Chase Young, he's got 16.5 sacks. I think Texas has less than that as a team this year. So it's pretty good for Chase Young, pretty good for Ohio State. That's why I think they're the most complete team. But yeah, like I said, I want somebody that's going to take down or have the best chance at taking down Ohio State. For right now, that's Georgia, but we just have to see how everybody plays this week, and it's going to be very interesting to see. All right, so it is 8 p.m., and I think I'm pretty much done. If you have anything to say? No?
I don't think so.
Well, yeah, I think we're done for today, guys. Done for tonight. Talked about a good bit in college football. A lot of stuff that went on last week. A lot of stuff that's going to go on this week. So, yeah, don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want to see more of the football forecast. We're going to be doing a little bit more of posting on social media and just kind of revamping our media a little bit and changing some of our channel art and things like that here in the coming days. And in the off season, a lot of things are going to be different too. We're going to have a little bit more update to every platform that we operate on. So yeah, it should be fun, and I hope to grow our community even more in the coming days as well. And the off season should give us a chance to do that before the coming season. This next season is going to be amazing as well. So yeah, thank you guys. I hope you guys have a great time watching all these games this weekend. And yeah, should be back with, I think Reese and Ryan are going to do Triple Threat on Thursday. So you guys can watch that. I believe we're going to have a fantasy football podcast in the works soon, even though it's, leading up to the off season. But either way, thank you guys for staying and watching, and please come back next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I will see you guys next week.